My name is Jacob Finch, and I live in a small town called Serenity Valley. I'm a 38-year-old office worker who has spent over a decade in my job. I'm not particularly remarkable. I am just your average guy, but I have always believed in doing my best. I try to be friendly and approachable, believing that a positive workspace is key to success. But all that changed when I met Lori, a coworker who would become my personal nightmare. Lori was not just your typical colleague. She embodied every toxic trait you could imagine. She was the kind of person who always had to be in control and manipulated everyone around her to get what she wanted. Nobody liked her, and it seemed that the more people disdained her, the more power she craved. She had this incredible skill of bending management to her will, making herself a living example of the phrase, "It's not what you know, but who you know." Lori was well versed in playing the victim card, and if anyone dared to cross her, she would threaten legal action, sending shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to wrong her. One day, during a meeting, her reenactment of a wounded animal when she pretended to be offended by the slightest comments had the effect of leaving all of us in a state of utter disbelief. She had a penchant for reporting minor infractions to management, ensuring that others faced consequences while she insulated herself in the oblivion she created. She called herself the Alabama Tick, deriving the name from some obscure movie reference where the predator was dug in deeper than any tick could burrow. To top it off, she got a job overseeing paperwork where if you did not bow down at her feet, your file would forever remain untouched. Once, she yelled at me in front of the entire office for having an extra space after a period, and I could see the joy in her eyes as she tore into me for what was essentially a typo. I felt belittled and angry. Lori seemed to derive satisfaction from pitting coworkers against each other, spreading gossip like wildfire while feigning innocence. Her reputation was so damaging that she earned the nickname the Eye of Sauron in our office. It was pitiful, really, watching how she hung around, waiting for her chance to catch someone slipping up, anything to exploit someone's weakness. I always wondered how someone could be so toxic, but I had my limits. Initially, I tried to avoid confrontation, but when my boss, a decent guy in his own right, started siding with Lori due to her threats of litigation, I knew I could not let this slide forever. Things escalated when I was assigned to an important legal project. Lori strutted up to my desk, looking like she owned the place. She declared that I was to work for her from that moment on and that my project was no longer a priority. I told her I had enough on my plate, and if she wanted me to abandon it, she needed to get a ruling from our head attorney absolving me of any blame if things did not go well. This only emboldened her, and she decided to wage war on me. The next year was like a living hell. My work was constantly undermined, and each time I made the smallest error, she berated me publicly as if I were trying to sabotage my own career. However, she had a significant weakness. There was a physical qualification that we had to take 4 times a year. Lori was never any good at it. The moment I found out I was in charge of arranging those qualifications, things took an interesting turn. I approached her smugly one day at her desk and said, "So, you want to play games and terrorize me? Fine, let's play." I stood behind her during the next qualification, lobbing insults just like she would do. "Are you actively trying to fail?" I yelled. I took it further by announcing over the PA system, "All those who have failed the qualification report to the tower immediately for retraining." Everyone looked at her, and her face turned a shade of crimson. I was careful to make it look like she was sneaking away to avoid further embarrassment. Miraculously, the harassment finally stopped, but Lori just redirected her toxicity toward others. It was painful to watch her destroy morale around the office, but I told myself to hold on. It couldn't last forever. I knew her reign would end eventually, and I hoped it would come sooner rather than later. Then, in one of those fateful meetings that people always dread, she lost her cool entirely during a meeting with the head of the office. She began to scream at him, and her outburst was so dramatic that it left everyone stunned. Shortly afterward, she was stripped of her role and handed the more mundane weekly clerical duties. It was the beginning of her downfall. A month after, we had an all-employee meeting, and as we praised Lori's replacement for turning around the department, I glanced over and spotted her standing near the snack table, tense and bitter. It was so toxic before. We cheered, our smiles growing broader with every word. I saw her throw down her bagel in rage, storming out of the room in tears, and it was one of the best sights I had ever witnessed. Moments later, she put in her medical retirement. On her last day, all of us gathered at the exit. We had arranged a farewell gift of sorts. As she marched out with her head bowed, we had a clip playing on the screen. It was of the eye of Sauron falling and being destroyed, a perfect metaphor for her demise. In that moment, the tension we had all felt for years melted away, replaced by relief. Laurie was finally gone, and the office felt lighter, freer. I can hardly describe the weight that had been taken off my shoulders. No more oppressive watch, no more whispers of deceit, and no more endless harassment. Although I had never sought revenge directly, I found it somehow fulfilling to watch her unravel, the satisfaction of seeing her taken down by her own toxic behavior providing me with a sense of closure. From that day on, it was like a part of the office revived. No longer would we fall prey to the manipulative games of a toxic tick. It was the dawn of a new chapter for us all, and I knew that our little corner of the world in Serenity Valley would only continue to grow.